I never imagined that a single patient could make me question everything I am, everything I've been for years, everything I swore to defend the day I first put on this white coat. I'm a doctor, and for a long time I thought that was enough to give my life meaning. To save, to heal, to relieve pain. Words we repeat so often that they become automatic, until someone takes them out of your hands. That night was just like so many others. One of those endless shifts where exhaustion has weight and every step echoes as if your shoes were made of lead. The shift was long, and the clock in the break room marked each hour with cruel precision. The smell of disinfectant had become part of the air itself, stuck to my clothes, my skin, my thoughts. The hum of machines, hurried footsteps, the distant sound of an emergency cart passing by. It all blended into a kind of symphony doctors learn to hear without listening. I had already handled 3 back-to-back emergencies: a multiple trauma patient from a car accident, an elderly woman with a silent heart attack, a child with a fever that wouldn't go down. Each one had drained me a little more. When I finally sat down, my hands were still trembling slightly. All I wanted was 5 minutes. 5 minutes of silence, to stare out the window and remind myself that the world still existed outside these walls. The sunset painted the city in a melancholic orange. The sun was sinking between the buildings, a fading promise turning the windows into mirrors of fading gold. That kind of light that feels like it's announcing something, even if you don't know what. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the glass in front of me, and for a moment, I thought of all the faces I'd seen reflected there. Faces caught somewhere between life and death, and that's when I saw him come in. The new patient. His steps were slow but steady. The hospital gown hung loosely from his frame, as if his body no longer had the strength to fill it. A nurse guided him gently by the arm. On his admission sheet I read, "Male, 68 years old, advanced cancer, no current treatment. Nothing unusual for this hospital." I had seen so many similar diagnoses that I'd learned not to feel too much. It was the only way to protect myself. But something in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't resignation. It was peace. A peace you don't get from morphine or blind faith, but from acceptance. That serenity unsettled me. He sat across from me, calm and composed, while I searched for his records on the computer. He watched me quietly, as if he already knew what I was going to say before I said it. I talked about protocols, about palliative options, about the treatment still available. I recited the same speech I'd repeated hundreds of times, almost mechanically. He listened without interrupting, with an attention so intense it made me feel exposed, as if every word I said weighed too little compared to the truth he already knew. When I finished, I waited for him to ask something, anything, but he only said, "I don't want treatment, doctor." I looked up, surprised. I explained the risks, the pain that might come, the progression of the disease. I talked about care, about pain control, about hope, though I wasn't sure where to find it anymore. Then he looked directly into my eyes, those clear, tired but steady eyes, and said something that still echoes in my mind every night. "Doctor, do you really heal, or do you just delay the inevitable?" The silence that followed was long, uncomfortable, almost unbearable. It felt like he was looking past my eyes, searching my soul for an answer I didn't have. I couldn't say a word. For a moment, everything in the room went quiet. It was just him, me, and the question hanging between us. He smiled faintly, a tired smile, but honest. "I was a doctor, too," he said. "For years, I believed that every patient who survived was a victory, until I realized it was never about winning or losing, it was about walking with them. Sometimes, doctor, the most human thing we can do is let life take its course." I didn't answer. His words pierced through me. I'd seen so many people die, and yet I'd never learned how to let anyone go. Always fighting death, as if admitting its existence was a kind of betrayal. He kept talking, but my mind was elsewhere, colliding with every thought I'd been avoiding for years. I remembered sleepless nights, the hands that slipped away from mine, the families who looked at me with grief disguised as blame. And I realized something painful. I had spent so many years trying to defeat death that I'd forgotten how to accompany life. We admitted him that night just for pain control. He didn't ask for much, only that we leave the window open. "I want to feel the night air," he said. Simple words, yet filled with meaning. That window, the same one I used to stare through whenever I wanted to escape my exhaustion. He, on the other hand, looked through it to stay. The next morning, during rounds, I found him watching the sunrise. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the light resting softly on his face. He turned to me and said with a faint smile, "Beautiful day to say goodbye, don't you think?" I tried to smile back, but something inside me was breaking, slowly, quietly. That man, with his calmness, made me question everything I'd built my life upon. All my effort, my sleepless nights, my hidden tears, maybe they were never enough. Maybe they were never meant to be. As we talked, he told me he had been an oncologist, that he'd spent his life trying to save others, until he realized no one really saves anyone. We just walk with them. We hold the line for as long as we can. He said the hardest part wasn't accepting death, but forgiving yourself for not being able to stop it. That night I couldn't sleep. I went back to the window, the same window where I'd stood so many times before. The city outside was still alive, its lights flickering in the distance, indifferent to everything happening within these hospital walls. I stood there, with my wrinkled coat and my stethoscope hanging loosely around my neck, staring at my reflection in the glass, barely recognizing the man looking back at me. When did medicine stop being an art and turn into a mechanical routine? When did I start measuring my worth only by the number of people who survived? I remembered my early years when every patient was a story, not a bed number. When a simple "thank you, doctor" made me feel invincible. When I believed saving lives was the goal, not just the path, but time and loss wear down even the purest convictions. Endless shifts, bad news, mistakes you carry in silence, they carve something deep inside you. And now, standing before that man, waiting for death without fear, I felt like a confused student before his teacher. He was teaching me, without meaning to, through his calm, his silence, and the way he looked at life, or perhaps at death. That night, as the hospital lights flickered in the distance, I began to understand what Paul, though I didn't yet know his name, was trying to show me: that the value of our profession isn't just in fighting death, but in giving dignity to the final breath. The days went by. He stayed the same, serene, peaceful, as if every sunrise were a gift. He asked for coffee, asked about my residency years, shared stories about his own patients. Sometimes he even gave me medical advice. It was impossible not to listen with respect. One day during one of those quiet talks, he said, "Do you know what my biggest mistake was, doctor? Believing I could cure everyone. That belief made me arrogant and it stole my peace. Only when I accepted that my duty was to walk beside them, not save them, only then did I truly understand what it means to be a doctor." I didn't respond, just nodded with a lump in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. 3 days later, when I arrived at the hospital, a nurse told me softly, "Doctor, the man in room 214 passed away early this morning." A strange emptiness filled me, like losing someone I had just begun to know. I entered his room. The window was open, letting the dawn light in. On the bedside table, a letter, with my name on it. "Doctor, thank you for respecting my decision. Not every doctor does. You have the heart of a healer, even if you sometimes forget. Remember this: we can't always choose how long we live, but we can choose how we walk with those who are leaving. And that, too, is a way of healing with gratitude, Paul." I read it once, then again, and again. Each time the words felt heavier. They weren't just ink on paper. They were a farewell and a lesson. Then I remembered. That name, that face. Years ago, I'd seen him at a medical conference. I was a young resident then, full of ambition. He was the keynote speaker, Dr. Paul M., palliative care specialist. I remembered thinking his talk about the dignity of dying was defeatist. Back then, I thought talking about death meant giving up, that a doctor should fight until the very last heartbeat. I never imagined that years later he would be my patient, or that his final words would teach me the lesson I refused to learn back then. He hadn't just died in front of me. He died with me because I was finally there with him, truly present. And somehow, that was also healing. I kept his letter in my coat pocket. The paper still felt warm, as if it held the last trace of his hands. I walked to the hallway window. The trees outside swayed in the wind. Some patients looked out too, searching for a glimpse of sky amid all the routine, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed without guilt. I realized medicine was never about defeating death, but about honoring life while it's still here. Accompanying isn't failure. Sometimes accompanying is the most human thing we can do. Since then, whenever a patient looks at me with fear and asks, "Am I going to die?" I don't hide behind charts or sterile words anymore. I just take their hand and say, "I don't know, but I'll be here with you, no matter what happens." And that's enough. Because sometimes, comfort isn't in promising everything will be okay, but in promising they won't be alone when it's not. I like to think Paul didn't come to my hospital to die. He came to teach me how to live, to remind me that even doctors, with all our science and skill, are still human, and that some battles aren't won with medicine but with presence. Now, every sunset, when the city turns that soft orange hue that reminds me of that night, I imagine him watching from another window, smiling, maybe proud that I finally understood his message. I've seen hundreds of patients since then. Fear, anger, denial. I've cried with families. I've felt the helplessness of the inevitable, but I've also seen peace in final moments, tears mixed with gratitude, hugs that healed years of silence, and in each of those moments, a part of me heals too, because maybe medicine isn't a shield against death, but a bridge toward understanding life, an act of love disguised as science. Because in the end, what truly heals us is not always medicine, but presence, compassion, listening. That night, as my shift ended, the hospital was calm. Monitors hummed softly. Footsteps faded in the halls. I rested my hand on the cold window pane. My reflection looked back, tired, but different. Yes, there were new wrinkles. But there was also peace. I no longer needed to win every battle. I just wanted to do what was right, to listen, to be there. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Since that day, I keep Paul's letter on my desk. Not to remember him, but to remember why I became a doctor. Because among all the noise and haste, we doctors sometimes forget. To heal isn't always to win. Sometimes it's simply to love and to stay. And every time a new resident joins our team, I hand them that letter and say, "Read this when you start to lose your purpose." This man was my teacher, and without knowing it, he'll be yours too. And that's how this story ends. A story that, though it sounds sad, taught me that even in pain, there's room to learn, to feel, and to heal. If this story made you think, or reminded you of someone who marked your life, share it in the comments below. I'd love to read your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one. Stories about life, medicine, and everything that makes us human. Thank you for listening until the end, for being part of this community where every story leaves a mark. See you in the next one.